Heat kills transmissions. It's the #1 killer of transmissions, whether it's the Turbo 350s, Turbo 400s, or even that 4L60 box of neutrals in my Yukon. Either way, heat can kill them all. And if you want your transmission to live a long, healthy life, one of the things you ought to consider is putting a transmission cooler on it. That's great and all, but how the heck do you do that? Well, I can tell you right off the bat, you don't want to rubber line that thing from the transmission all the way to the nose. And original equipment from the factory typically used metal hard lines as a flare fitting on the transmission end, as well as the side into the radiator. But let's face it, we're gearheads. The way it left the factory is probably never enough. So, what you can do is you can use braided steel line. But with your standard braided rubber lines and PTFE being an option, which one do you choose? Well, I've actually got about 10 years on these set of braided rubber lines in my El Camino here, and they're actually starting to show some signs of degradation. I believe that these are actually weeping through the rubber out of the overbraid. I've got a small belly pan under there that helps collect drips, and it was coming up with a disturbingly large amount of fluid, and I believe these may have been part of the culprit. My solution was to make a move to PTFE. This is an incredibly long, sciencey word that is very hard to pronounce in normal conversation. PTFE. Basically, it's a form of Teflon, and this is still the PTFE overbraid, so it has a lot of abrasion resistance as well as being pretty resistant to things. Now, PTFE has a lot of advantages over rubber, being more heat safe, meaning that it'll take a little bit more heat before it causes problems, and it's less permeable, meaning it's less likely to have things weep from the inside to the outside. So where those rubber lines had a lifespan of about 10 years, this should be at least 15 years as far as the time that they're in the car if they're taken care of correctly. And that's not a hard, fast rule. If something happens, they get crushed, they get compromised, they can have a much shorter lifespan. But PTFE isn't the hard, fast answer. They're actually a little bit different than the AN lines in that they're a smaller diameter on the hose itself, and they take a special fitting. So let's start assembling one end, and we'll get it installed on the car so that way we can make the rest of the lines match where they go up here in the grill at the transmission cooler.
Now what makes the PTFE fittings different is you have the nut that goes over the end of the hose there. You have the little olive or ferrule that's supposed to go between the braid and the Teflon, and then you have basically the barb that gets stuffed up the middle. Everything gets tightened down and tightens up and seals basically the Teflon. The overbraid is just there for, protection, abrasion resistance, good looks, all that kind of stuff. Okay, that's all great, but how the heck do you cut this stuff? Yes, you can see I got some tin snips there. Well, first and foremost, if you have a pair of hose cutters like this, you want to make sure that those blades are sharp. These have been used for other things, and you can see there's some nicks and chunks taken out of those blades, so they're not as good as they used to be. What happens is if you do it wrong, this is like the end as I bought it, it gets all frayed out and it's an absolute disaster. It's a mess, it sucks. Other ways that you can do this is using a cutoff wheel. I've heard of people using a bandsaw. I actually tried a piece of spare stuff on the bandsaw. It was questionable at best. Basically, we're gonna trim up the end nice and square, put the olive in. Well, we better put the nut on first because, like every good flare fitting, you forget the nut, right? So we're going to slide that guy on, do the olive, and then stuff that up there, tighten it all down.
Now with the first end installed, I'm going to clean this up a little bit, shoot some compressed air from the other end, go put it in the car. Now, it's worth noting that on the previous line, I was just using these very inexpensive Home Depot sourced electrical holder-uppers of sorts. I'm probably going to reuse those, and it's worth noting that they are rather loose and sloppy on this guy, so I'll probably, on my next run to Home Depot, go get some ones that are a little bit smaller than this, but short term, this will work just fine. I'm going to go get it set up to the transmission, get it run to the nose, get this cut, and make the other end. Disaster has struck. So I got the hose end on the line, right? And I figured I would just attach it at the transmission, run it forward, but the problem is I really screwed up. I maimed the first couple of threads there, well, first thread and a half maybe, and I also hurt the sealing surface on the little aluminum AN line, so that fitting is now absolute garbage. And to make it more interesting, I had actually modified this one because the transmission itself isn't drilled as deep as most normal fittings go. So now I have to figure out how to duplicate this fitting onto new one. So I have a couple of new fittings right here, fresh off the Amazon truck. These are the finest discount AN fittings that money can buy. There'll be a link to these in the description. So if you need a transcooler line, these are 1/4 inch NPS straight. Most GM transmissions are straight thread. If you try and put a tapered fitting in there, you'll crack the case. We don't want to see that. So let's clean the old fitting up, do some measuring. Someone may be asking, how the heck are you going to duplicate that fitting onto another fitting? Well, the answer is I'm going to use a depth micrometer. You could use the back end of a pair of calipers, but I'm a machinist by trade. I got the tools. I better use them, right? So I'm just going to measure down from the end of the fitting to that copper sealing surface there. And I am getting about 362 thousandths deep. So now that just means I have to transfer that same number over to this fitting. Let's see what this guy measures. He's coming in at 421.5 thousandths. So that means I got to take about 60-ish thousandths off the end of that fitting to make it match that one. Let's go to the lathe. More projects. Let's take care of something that needs to be done. It is very dark over the lathe, and I have this brand new Barina light. This is rated at 10,000 lumens, and if it lives up to that claim, it ought to make that corner like noonday sun. Let's get it hung up real quick so we can see what the heck we're doing.
So that's like all right.
Yep, looks like 10,000 lumens to me. All that work. We remember the original measured 362 with ye old depth micrometer. We're going to put it here. 359 within 2 thousandths of an inch. That is plenty good for that. Let's make sure it threads into the fitting before I go into the car and ruin another one. All right, here's proof. Fitting we just cut down, the fitting that ruined the other one, it goes right in and sits down just like it's supposed to. Now we can put this guy in the transmission. Okay, it is very hard to film down here, but the top one is the new transcooler fitting, looking sharp, all seated down. Now I'm going to thread the line into place and get it squared up and snugged down so we can continue with this job. All right, so I just found a pretty nice little trick. I've got a long center punch with a taper on it, and after I cut off the other end, it was a little out of round. So I took the long center punch and just kind of stuffed it into place nicely. And then I was able to see if there were any areas that needed to be touched up. Came into them with a sharp razor knife and just zipped it clean. And then, I don't have the hose clamp, but I used a hose clamp to kind of compress the braided lines. That'll make it so much easier to go into the new fitting. So let's do some assembly. lines run from the transmission, get my hand out of the way, and yes, I'm still reusing the Home Depot electrical conduit clamps because I had them and they work, and they'll work well enough for now until I can get something that fits better. Now, they're run in exactly the same place as the original, I say original, as the previous braided lines, and I even did the Hot Rod Magazine Dave Freeberger trick as far as making wire separators, except these are hose separators here. Also, using some heater hose split up the side to basically prevent chafing and hold it in places to go around corners, so that way it doesn't wear a hole in the line, the metal, the radiator, you know, all those things. So now that all the fittings are in place, let's start the car and check for leaks. So now that everything's proven to be leak-free, I'm going to put the grill back into it, get this car on the ground, and put it back in the trailer because, frankly, it's time to go racing. Thanks for watching, guys, and if you want to check something out similar to this, check this video out over here. We'll catch you later.